The moment Elaine, my mother-in-law, walked into the Thanksgiving dinner, her eyes scanning the room like she owned it, I knew trouble was brewing. "How's your mom doing?" she asked, her voice dripping with a feigned concern that couldn't mask the jealousy lurking beneath. As she eagerly suggested a trip to the mountains, blatantly ignoring the gravity of my mother's illness, I realized that this wasn't just about her wanting time with us. It was a twisted game of one-upmanship where her need for attention clashed with our somber reality. Life before September was a quiet stream, flowing undisturbed. My husband Jake and I had carved out a modest life in our bustling city, far from our hometowns. We were content, or so we thought, until the day my phone rang with news that turned our world upside down. "Mom's sick," my brother's voice trembled on the other end. "It's breast cancer, and it's bad." The words hit me like a physical blow. Mom, the invincible matriarch of our family, the woman who had weathered every storm, was now facing her toughest battle. Metastatic breast cancer. The words echoed in my mind, a relentless reminder of the fragility of life. Jake held me that night, as I cried, his arms a stronghold against the chaos unraveling within me. We knew what we had to do. Within weeks, we arranged to work remotely and packed our lives into suitcases, ready to move across the country to be with Mom. Our plan was met with mixed reactions. My in-laws, particularly my mother-in-law, Elaine, were initially overjoyed at the prospect of us moving back. She lived just an hour and a half from my parents, a proximity that seemed convenient but soon proved to be anything but. "Can't wait to have you both nearby." Elaine's voice chirped over the phone, a stark contrast to the somber mood that had enveloped our lives. I appreciated her enthusiasm, or at least I tried to. But as our departure date neared, her excitement morphed into a relentless expectation for our time and attention. It was as if she couldn't see beyond her own desires, blind to the grim reality we were facing. "We should plan a trip to the mountains," she suggested during one of our calls, her tone oblivious to the weight of our situation. I exchanged a weary look with Jake. How could we explain to her that our move wasn't a joyous reunion, but a somber duty to be with my ailing mother? We arrived at my childhood home in November, welcomed by the familiar sights and scents, now tinged with the underlying scent of medication and antiseptic. Mom, once vibrant and full of life, was a shadow of her former self, the cancer stealing away her strength, but not her spirit. Elaine's calls became more frequent, each one a subtle reminder of her expectations. Thanksgiving was approaching, and she had made it clear she expected us to join her. It was a delicate balance, trying to cater to her needs without neglecting my mother. The Thanksgiving dinner was a surreal experience. Elaine, dressed in her festive best, chatted animatedly, occasionally throwing glances at my mother, who sat quietly, conserving her energy. I could feel the tension in the air by an unspoken battle of needs and desires. "How's your mom doing?" Elaine asked, her voice tinged with a curiosity that felt more invasive than empathetic. "She's fighting," I replied, forcing a smile. "We're just taking it one day at a time." "That's the spirit," Elaine said, but her eyes quickly shifted to Jake. "We should definitely plan that mountain trip soon, for some fresh air." I bit back a retort, the words "not now" sitting heavily on my tongue. This was not the time for leisure plans, not when every moment with my mother was precious. That night, as Jake and I lay in my old bedroom, the weight of our situation settled heavily on us. We were caught in a tug-of-war between duty and obligation, each pull threatening to tear us apart. "Your mom doesn't get it," Jake whispered, his voice heavy with fatigue. "It's like she's living in a different world." I nodded, the reality of our situation sinking in. We were here for my mother, to support her in her fight against an unrelenting enemy. But in doing so, we had inadvertently ignited another battle, one with an adversary we hadn't anticipated, Elaine's jealousy and unmet expectations. The Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house with Elaine present was a balancing act on a tightrope. While Mom rested in her chair, conserving her energy, Elaine's presence filled the room like an overzealous perfume. Her laughter was a bit too loud, her stories a bit too long. Jake and I exchanged knowing glances, each trying to mediate the unspoken tension. Elaine's eyes often darted towards my mother, her gaze a mix of curiosity and something I couldn't quite place. Was it envy? Pity? I couldn't tell. Mom, for her part, offered polite smiles, a testament to her enduring grace even in the face of her illness. The real test came when Elaine suggested a post-dinner walk. "A little stroll will do us good," she announced, her voice tinged with an enthusiasm that felt out of place. I hesitated, glancing at Mom. "I think we'll stay in," I said gently. "Mom needs to rest." Elaine's smile faltered for a moment, a flash of disappointment crossing her features before she masked it with a nod. "Of course, dear. Another time, then." As she left with Jake's sister, I couldn't shake off the feeling of guilt. It gnawed at me, the thought that maybe I was being too harsh, too unyielding. But then I looked at Mom. Her face etched with the quiet battle she fought every day, and I knew my loyalty lay with her. The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits, chemotherapy sessions, and quiet evenings at home. Mom's strength ebbed and flowed like the tides, some days bright and talkative, others withdrawn and weary. Through it all, Jake and I were her steadfast anchors, holding on amidst the storm. Meanwhile, Elaine's calls became a constant undercurrent in our lives. "When are you coming to visit?" she would ask, her voice laced with a hint of reproach. "I miss you both so much." Jake handled these conversations with a patience I admired. "We're really tied up with Mom's treatments," he'd explain, his tone apologetic yet firm, "but we'll try to make it soon." Each call ended with promises left hanging like unfinished sentences, and I could sense Jake's frustration growing. It was a tug-of-war between his mother's wants and his own sense of duty towards mine. As Christmas neared, the air grew colder, and so did the atmosphere between us and Elaine. She invited us to her annual family Christmas party, a lavish affair that was the highlight of her social calendar. But the thought of a crowded house, with laughter and merriment, felt jarringly out of sync with our current reality. "We can't," I told Jake, my decision firm. "It's too risky for Mom, and honestly, for me too." Jake agreed, but the task of conveying this to Elaine fell heavily on his shoulders. I could only imagine how she would take this news, another rejection, another preference for my family over hers. But our priority was clear, and it wasn't the festive allure of a Christmas party. It was the quiet, somber room where my mother lay, fighting a battle that overshadowed all else. The decision not to attend Elaine's Christmas party was met with a strained understanding on her part, but the underlying disappointment was palpable. "I understand, dear," she said over the phone, her voice a mixture of resignation and thinly veiled frustration, "but you'll be missing a lovely evening." Jake's response was gentle but unwavering. "Mom's health comes first, you know that." I listened from the other side of the room, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. The situation was delicate, a fragile truce at best, and I feared any wrong word might shatter it. The days leading up to Christmas were a study in contrasts. While Elaine prepared for her festive gathering, our home was enveloped in a quiet routine of caregiving and support for my mother. The joy of the season seemed a distant echo, muffled by the more pressing concerns of health and survival. Elaine's occasional updates about the party preparations felt like intrusions from another world. "We'll have a lovely tree, and the children will put on a little play," she enthused during one call. "That sounds nice," I replied, forcing a smile into my voice. But my mind was elsewhere, on the pale figure resting in the next room, her life hanging in a delicate balance. The day of the party arrived, and with it came a flurry of messages and photos from Elaine, showcasing the festive atmosphere at her home. Each image was a splash of color and light, a stark contrast to the somber tones of our current life. "I wish you could be here," Elaine texted, a note of longing in her words. Jake sighed as he read the message. "I know she's trying to include us, but it just makes it harder." I nodded, understanding his conflict. It was a no-win situation. Staying here was an unspoken acknowledgement of our priorities, but it also meant widening the gap between us and Elaine. As evening fell, the sounds of laughter and music from Elaine's party reached us through phone calls and messages. It was as if the merriment from there underscored the silence in our home. "I feel like I'm letting her down," Jake admitted, his voice heavy with guilt. "You're doing what's right," I reassured him, although I grappled with my own doubts. Were we being unfair to Elaine? But then I looked at my mother, her face serene yet etched with the lines of her struggle, and I knew we had made the only choice we could. That night, as we sat in the quiet living room, the glow of the Christmas lights seemed dimmer, the festive spirit subdued. Our hearts were with Mom, in this battle that allowed no room for distractions, no matter how well-intentioned they might be. Elaine's world of celebrations and gatherings seemed a universe away, and for now, that was a distance we had to maintain. The aftermath of the Christmas party left a subtle shift in Elaine's attitude towards us. Her calls, once filled with exuberant chatter, now carried a note of coolness, a hint of reproach that lingered like a shadow. The emotional distance was growing, a chasm widened by unspoken grievances and misunderstood intentions. Jake and I found ourselves discussing Elaine more often, trying to navigate this delicate terrain. "She just doesn't see the whole picture," Jake would say, his brow furrowed in frustration. It's like she's only thinking about herself." I couldn't help but agree, though a part of me empathized with Elaine's loneliness. It was a confusing tangle of emotions, understanding her need for attention, yet resenting the pressure it put on us. As New Year approached, the tension reached a new height. Elaine called, her voice brittle with contained emotion. "I feel like you're avoiding me," she accused, her words sharp and direct. Jake's response was calm, but I could hear the strain in his voice. "Mom, it's not about avoiding you. We're just really focused on Nerder's mother's name right now." Elaine's reply was a mixture of hurt and anger. "You don't think I understand? I'm a mother too, but you're treating me as if I'm not part of this family." The conversation spiraled into an uncomfortable confrontation, with Elaine expressing her feelings of being sidelined and neglected. Her words were laced with a bitterness that took us by surprise. "You're always there for her, but what about me? Don't I matter?" The call ended on a tense note, leaving an uneasy silence in its wake. I looked at Jake, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. The situation was more complex than we had realized. It wasn't just about Elaine's demands for attention. It was about her feeling of loss, of not being a priority in her son's life anymore. We sat in silence, the weight of the situation settling heavily upon us. It was clear that this was more than just a case of competing demands. It was a deep-seated feeling of jealousy that Elaine harbored, a jealousy that was now openly affecting our relationship. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't help but feel a surge of anger towards Elaine. How could she be so self-centered, so blind to what we were going through? But then, in the quiet of the night, a thought struck me. Perhaps Elaine's jealousy was rooted in fear, a fear of losing her place in her son's life, a fear exacerbated by the crisis we were facing. It was a bitter pill to swallow, recognizing that beneath the surface of Elaine's demands and complaints lay a deeper issue, one that needed addressing. But the question remained, how could we bridge this growing gap? How could we heal the wounds that were slowly tearing our family apart? The days that followed were a dance around unspoken words and unaddressed feelings. Jake and I knew that the situation with Elaine couldn't be left to fester, yet the courage to confront it head-on was hard to muster. Each of Elaine's calls now felt like walking on a tightrope, balancing between reassurance and honesty, trying not to fall into an abyss of conflict. Finally, one chilly evening, Jake decided it was time to address the elephant in the room. "We need to talk to her, face to face," he said, determination lacing his voice. "This can't go on like this." I agreed, albeit with a sense of trepidation. The thought of confronting Elaine, of laying bare all the hurt and misunderstandings, was daunting. Yet the need for resolution, for some semblance of peace, was greater. We arranged to meet Elaine at a small cafe, a neutral ground away from the emotional landscapes of our homes. The meeting was tense from the outset. Elaine's smile was tight, her eyes guarded. We exchanged pleasantries, but they were just brittle veneers over the turmoil underneath. Jake took the lead. "Mom, we need to talk about what's been going on," he began, his voice steady but gentle. Elaine's facade wavered, her eyes flashing a mix of defensiveness and hurt. "So now you have time for me?" she retorted, the bitterness evident. "We've always had time for you," I interjected, trying to keep my voice even. "But Mom's illness, it's been consuming us." Elaine shook her head, a sigh escaping her. "I understand that she's sick, but what about me? Don't I count for anything?" The conversation unfolded, a raw and honest dialogue that peeled back layers of hurt, assumptions, and unspoken fears. Elaine spoke of feeling abandoned, of fearing that she had lost her place in Jake's life. Jake expressed his struggle to balance his duties, his guilt over not being able to meet everyone's expectations. There were tears, moments of heated words, but also instances of quiet understanding. It was a cathartic release, an airing of grievances that had long been suppressed. "I just feel so alone," Elaine confessed, her voice cracking with emotion. "Ever since you moved, I feel like I've been losing you." Jake reached across the table, taking his mother's hand. "You're not losing me, Mom, but we have to face what's in front of us right now. Nair's mother's name needs us." As the conversation drew to a close, there was a sense of relief, a lightening of the load we had all been carrying. It wasn't a magical resolution. The issues were too complex for quick fixes. But it was a start, a step towards understanding and healing. We left the cafe with a tentative plan to stay more connected, to include Elaine in our lives in ways that were manageable given our current circumstances. It was a compromise, an acknowledgement of each other's needs and limitations. That night, as I sat beside my mother, holding her frail hand in mine, I felt a sense of peace. The confrontation with Elaine had been difficult, but it had opened a door to empathy and understanding, a path to navigate this challenging journey with a little more grace and a little less burden. In the weeks that followed our meeting with Elaine, a subtle change began to weave through our interactions. The air of tension that once hung between us started to dissipate, replaced by a cautious but growing understanding. We kept Elaine more involved through regular phone calls and occasional visits, ensuring she felt included and valued. Elaine, for her part, seemed to make an effort to understand the gravity of our situation. She started asking more about my mother's health, her voice carrying genuine concern. It was a small but significant shift, indicating a willingness to see beyond her own needs. Jake and I also worked on balancing our time and energy. We realized that while my mother's illness demanded much of us, it was important not to neglect other relationships, especially with Elaine. It was a delicate balancing act, but one we were now more equipped to handle with empathy and understanding. As spring approached, bringing with it a sense of renewal, so too did our family dynamics begin to find a new equilibrium. My mother's health showed small but encouraging signs of improvement, and with it, our spirits lifted. The heavy burden of the past months started to ease, allowing us to breathe a little more freely. Elaine's transformation was perhaps the most remarkable. The jealousy and bitterness that had once clouded her interactions with us slowly faded, revealing a more compassionate and understanding side of her. She even started joining us for quiet afternoons with my mother, bringing with her an air of warmth and positivity. One such afternoon, as we sat in the garden, Elaine reached out to my mother, taking her hand gently. "I'm here for you too," she said softly. The moment was simple yet profound, marking a new chapter in our relationship. Jake and I watched this exchange, a sense of relief and gratitude washing over us. The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but it had brought us to a place of greater understanding and compassion. As the story of our family unfolded, I realized the power of open communication and empathy. Our confrontation with Elaine had opened a door to healing, not just for our strained relationships, but also within ourselves. It taught us the importance of facing difficulties head-on, of acknowledging and addressing the emotions that drive us. The final chapter of this journey was yet to be written, but as I looked at my family, united in our garden, I felt hopeful. We had navigated the stormy waters of jealousy, illness, and misunderstanding, and had found a way to emerge stronger and more connected. Life, I understood, was a tapestry of complex emotions and experiences. But with love, patience, and a willingness to understand each other's perspectives, we could weave a story of resilience and togetherness. And in that story, we found our strength and our peace.